The night they bound her fate to his name, the wind carried dust-like whispers of judgment across the yard. Lanterns swayed, shadows trembling against the walls, as if the house itself knew what was being taken. She stood with her hands folded, fingers numb, eyes fixed on a knot in the wood that refused to blur no matter how hard she blinked. They said it was protection. They said it was necessary. They said his reputation would keep worse men away. He arrived without ceremony. No smile, no bravado. Just a man shaped by hard miles and harder choices. A gunslinger the townsfolk named Outlaw because it was easier than admitting they needed him when law failed. His hat brim hid his eyes, but she felt them on her anyway, measuring not her worth, but the danger around her. When the words were spoken, they landed heavy and final. A marriage forged from fear and convenience. A promise neither heart had asked for. She did not look at him when it ended. She waited for the cruelty she'd been warned about. The claim, the command, the hand that would close around her wrist like ownership. Instead, he stepped back. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly, voice rough as gravel warmed by sun. Not a word, not a look. The room shifted. People exchanged glances. This was not the man they'd described. They rode before dawn. He kept his distance in the saddle, letting the horse between them breathe. When shots cracked in the hills, warnings more than threats, he angled himself closer without touching her, body becoming a shield he never announced. She watched him then, how his eyes scanned every ridge, how his hand hovered near his gun not with hunger, but with restraint. How he listened to the land as if it spoke a language he respected. At camp, he built the fire low, passed her the last of the water, turned his back when she slept. "Why?" she asked finally, the question tearing free from weeks of silence. "Because I said I'd protect you," he answered. "And because forcing anything makes it rot." Night pressed in. Coyotes sang their thin, aching song. She realized the truth with a slow, startling clarity. The danger everyone feared was not the man beside her, but the world chasing them both. And somewhere between the snap of embers and the steady watch of his shadow against the dark, fear loosened its grip. Just a little. The road did not soften for them. It stretched long and unforgiving, a ribbon of dust and stone that tested every promise made in fear. Days burned hot enough to peel patience from the skin. Nights fell cold, sharp with stars that watched without mercy. And through it all, he rode half a length ahead of her, always scanning, always listening, as if danger were not something that appeared suddenly, but something that announced itself long before it arrived. She began to notice the small things. How he chose paths that bent away from towns, not because he feared the law, but because crowds carried their own kind of violence. How he woke before dawn and checked her horse's hooves before checking his own gun. How, when riders appeared on the horizon, his body shifted instinctively, subtle, practiced, placing himself where a bullet would find him first. He never said, "I will keep you safe." He simply did. At first, she kept her distance, ate in silence, slept wrapped in her coat with one hand on a small knife she barely knew how to use. Trust, she had learned, was a currency spent once and regretted forever. But silence has a way of changing shape when it is shared. One night, rain found them. Sudden, violent, the kind that turns earth into slick betrayal. They took shelter beneath a rock overhang, the storm roaring so loudly it erased the world beyond their breath. She was shaking, not from cold alone. He noticed without looking, removed his coat, held it out, not toward her hands, but at a respectful distance, as if giving her space to decide. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," he replied. She took it anyway. The coat smelled like leather and smoke and long roads. It smelled like survival, and when her shoulders stopped trembling, something inside her shifted, not into trust yet, but into recognition. "You could have left," she said suddenly. "After the wedding. You could have taken the money and disappeared." He stared out into the rain. "I've done that kind of disappearing before. It never leaves you." She wanted to ask what he meant. Wanted to know how a man earned a reputation so dark it frightened entire towns. But the questions stayed where they were. Some stories reveal themselves only when they are ready. Trouble found them 3 days later. They were crossing a narrow pass when the sound of hooves came fast and wrong. Too many, too reckless. He reacted instantly, pulling her horse behind a rise, pushing her down with a hand that was firm but careful. Stay, he said, not a command, a plea. The gunfight was quick and brutal. Shots cracked against stone. Dust filled the air. She pressed herself into the ground, heart hammering, counting breaths she wasn't sure she'd get to finish. When it ended, silence returned heavy and stunned. He stood alone when she looked up. Blood darkened his sleeve, but he didn't notice. He was watching the horizon, making sure the danger had truly passed before he turned back to her. Only then did he sink to one knee. She ran to him without thinking. Her hands shook as she pressed cloth to his arm. You're hurt, he winced. Looks worse than it is. Why would you do that? She demanded, fear breaking through restraint. Why take bullets meant for me? He met her eyes then. Really met them, and for the first time she saw the man beneath the outlaw. Because, he said quietly, you were forced into this. I wasn't. The truth of it hit her harder than the gunfire. That night, as she tended his wound, their hands brushed. Neither pulled away. The space between them, once wide and cautious, narrowed, not with desire, but with understanding. She realized something that frightened her more than the men who had chased them. She felt safe. And safety, she knew, was the most dangerous thing of all, because once you find it, you begin to imagine a future where it might last. He slept lightly, pain carving lines into his face even in rest. She watched him by the fire and understood the cost of the shield he carried. The outlaw was not protecting her because he owned her. He was protecting her because somewhere along the road, she had become part of his heart, and hearts, once claimed, demand everything. Morning came thin and pale, as if the sun itself hesitated to witness what was next. He woke before her, as always, pain tightening his jaw when he moved. He cleaned the blood from his sleeve in the creek and wrapped the wound tighter, not because it needed it, but because she would worry less. He had learned the shape of her concern the way a man learns the weight of a loaded gun, by paying attention. They rode into the valley by mid-morning. It was a bad place for mercy. A bowl of land that trapped sound and made escape a rumor. He knew it the moment he saw the rocks stacked like teeth along the ridgeline. He slowed, eyes narrowing, hand lifting just enough to signal caution. She felt it before she saw it. The air changed. The birds were gone. Stay close, he said, voice steady. If anything happens, I know, she replied softly. I stay. The riders came fast,